Thank you very much. And politics is tough, and it's in many cases not a very nice world, but it is a nice world today, and I appreciate it very much. A transition that's so smooth, it'll be as smooth as it can get, and I very much appreciate that, Jim.
You're welcome.
A 2-hour tete-a-tete for the ages. Donald Trump returned to the White House this morning for a meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden. The White House says the pair discussed a number of issues like national security and domestic policy, and that Trump came with a list of specific questions. After the meeting, the former president continued naming people to his future cabinet. Here are the newest additions to that list. Senator Marco Rubio from Florida is nominated as Secretary of State. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy will lead a newly created Department of Government Efficiency. Pete Hegseth gets the nomination for Defense Secretary. He's an Army vet as well as Fox News personality. And Tulsi Gabbard, who ran for the Democratic nomination back in 2020, becomes the Director of National Intelligence. Matt Gaetz, finally, very controversial congressman from Florida, becomes the Attorney General. So is Canada ready to work with Trump's new team, or what we know of it so far? Let's bring back the front bench: Saeed Selvam, Jamie Ellerton, Karl Belanger, and Hannah Thibedeau. Hannah, I'll start with you. What sticks out to you? I mean, like, I've been listening to all this strategy discussion, Are these is this Matt Gaetz, Tulsi Gabbard picked to sort of make others look less wild by comparison? Is this just what, as Rob Benzie calls it, like just one giant troll, like let's troll everyone exercise? Like what's your take on this cabinet so far?
I like the Benzie one. That's pretty good. But these are Trump loyalists. And if you look at all of them, they pretty much all are talking about immigration. You asked the question in your intro there, is the Canadian government prepared to handle this government? I want to tell you a little bit of inside information that I've been hearing. And we know that the cabinet shuffle is coming soon because there are cabinet ministers that have stepped down. What I'm hearing is that Chrystia Freeland is going to reprise the role in foreign affairs, probably. I'm going to add the word probably in there because you never know, things can change. And what wouldn't surprise me is that it would likely be wise for them to bring back and put together the team that helped renegotiate NAFTA back 2.0, so CUSMA. So these are the types of things I'm hearing. But I also know that Trump is not a fan of Freeland whatsoever. However, they are ready to go tete-a-tete with the Trump administration, especially when it comes to renegotiating the 3.0 CUSMA. So just keep an eye on that as we start to see the rumblings of how the Trudeau government is going to handle this. Because also one of the other things, if you look at all of these, I think all of them, these appointees, there are very few Canadian allies, or Trudeau allies, should I say, in the Trump appointees. They have all said harsh things about our prime minister.
Yeah, there's some good write-ups of certainly they're not his biggest fan. They're not. So there are some like Elise Stefanik, who's going to be UN ambassador, who knows Canada very well. She chaired like an interparliamentary group on it. But to your point, yes, if you look through all their social media, they've said some pretty condemning things, I guess you could say, of the federal government in particular right now. Hannah brings up, Jamie, sort of the Canadian strategy, moving people around, trying to think back to the first round of negotiations, which, to give the government credit, went well for them. Is it smart strategically from where you sit, looking at the picks that we're seeing tonight, looking at kind of the movement on the Trump administration? Is it strategically smart to resurrect that way of doing things, or might there be something else necessary given what we are seeing?
I think it's going to effectively require an all-of-government overhaul in terms of how the Canada-U.S. relationship is managed. Obviously, when you look at what took place under the NAFTA renegotiation, it was very focused on trade and the trade deal and leveraged economic relationships, governor to premier relationships and the like to really move that thing forward and get it done. But I think what you're seeing from the Trump orbit so far since his election night is this is going to be essentially a White House that's far more belligerent and far less restrained by those who are around him. I think the picks you're seeing today show that the past 8 years were nothing more than an 8-year audition of The Apprentice to land in the second administration's secretary by proving their fealty to Donald Trump. And for Canada, it's also going to have to, of course, look at what a Canadian audience has to say to this and how they're judging their government and holding Canadians to account, because ultimately that is what's going to be at play. And so I think when you look at this from a Trudeau government standpoint, it's one thing to try and line up your roster and kind of play personality politics the way they did on trade. But I think what you're seeing and hearing from the Trump administration as they prepare for this transition far exceeds anything of what this team has had to deal with. Frankly, anyone has had to deal with. And so rerunning a tired playbook from 6 years ago or 8 years ago, I think is setting Canada up to fail.
I think that's a smart point, Karl. Like I look at that list and it's not exactly, John Bolton and John Kelly, and it is very much people who have remained loyal to Trump, particularly over the past few years. If you were advising the people around the Prime Minister right now, how do you kind of deal with that? How do you engage with that? What would you say?
Well, the first thing I would say is that Canada is not the first thing on the order of business for the Trump administration. Canada is not the first country they're thinking about when they think about foreign affairs. So let's calm down. Let's take a deep breath. Like, there's no need to panic. We survived the first Trump administration. We had difficult negotiations. We will have some more, especially on trade. We know Trump has promised that it will bring this back. So it will happen again. So you prepare, as you have been, if you've been responsible, and that's the signals we got, that it's a possibility, and you're going to have to face that. But don't poke the bear, don't respond to the troll, don't take the bite, and don't go toe-to-toe with them. Because at the end of the day, the coverage in the United States is not about Canada. We're making the big deal out of it because, it's our biggest trading partner. But for them, we're just an afterthought, really. We're not the first order of business.
So that leads me to my next question, Saeed, which is, the context is different in one particular way for the Trudeau government. They are going to be facing re-election as all of this unfolds, right? And the way that you interact with the Trump administration will have an impact on domestic politics as well. How do they do what Karl says, don't poke the bear, but at the same time, do whatever they think is necessary in order to curry favor with voters or leave an impression that they're sticking up for Canada?
Well, I think the focus has to be on a Canada First approach, especially when it comes to a campaign platform, addressing Canadian concerns, addressing issues like the economy and affordability. That has to be top of mind specifically for this government and also for the parties that are vying for the votes of Canadians. But when you look at the USA cabinet, the one that Trump has assembled and put together and is in the process of finalizing, that is a very USA First cabinet. So they're also very much focused on the success and the promotion of the U.S. economy, which also entails, if Trump follows through on the threats, big tariffs. So 10% tariff on imports, and then a potentially 100% tariff on automotive parts and automotive. So that's a big deal, especially when you have somebody like Elon Musk now, who is appointed to the Department of Government Efficiency, whatever that might be, right? So it's an advisory role. But when you have somebody working so close to the President of the United States, who's also in charge of a massive automotive manufacturer, it's very telling in terms of the policies that they're trying to put forward. And when it comes to the Canadian government and what they have to prioritize, they would be best suited to really focus on domestic manufacturing and getting the economy going if they want to have a chance in the next election.
When it comes to their rhetoric, though, Hannah, do you think a Canada First message would land with voters and lead up to an election?
I think it would land first with voters here. I think what the Canadian government has to do is find opportunities on how it will work with this Trump administration. Critical minerals, sovereignty of the North. If you're looking at spending 2% GDP, but only by 2032, I think it is, start talking about things that really concern this administration when it comes to, you don't want China and Russia in control of the North. So how do you make sure that you protect that? You put that as something as a first policy. So those are the types of things they really have to focus on, are the things that are common. And I would do, almost exactly what Donald Trump has been doing. Put a picture up of all of these new people in his administration and then find the common things that they can work together on, because the rhetoric isn't something they're going to win.
Is that going to be a tough sell, though, Jamie, to domestic audiences where Donald Trump still in this country is largely unpopular?
Yeah, and I also think it's going to be a tough sell for this government, the Liberal Party, talking to Liberal members. They have essentially spent the past 6 months showcasing and trying to trial ballooning some very staunch anti-Trump rhetoric to try and stem their own political bleeding right now and to have very negligible effect. And so I think if this gets any kind of whiff that they're being excessively partisan for their own partisan interests and putting those ahead of the country, I just think it further compounds their political troubles. So for the Trudeau government right now, I think they're kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't. And I think a Canada First approach in terms of what that ultimately means to stand up for Canadians and the rhetoric that gets wrapped in that is almost easy, but how they map in terms of what they're able to do and where the U.S. administration is actually going to be more activist in creating problems as opposed to just day-to-day caretaker being out of sight, out of mind is going to be probably the greatest minefield they have to manage.
I just got a minute left, 30 seconds to each of you, Karl. They've stopped making those partisan comments about comparing, Poilievre to MAGA. Is there a risk there for the Liberals? And conversely, what about the Conservatives?
Well, the risk is that somebody will do it for them. And it could be the NDP. They've done it in the past. And going after Pierre Poilievre and comparing it to Trump will happen if there's no Liberal Rat Pack 2.0 that could do that for the Prime Minister. Not advising the Prime Minister to do it, but if the Liberals don't do it somehow, the NDP will, and it may pay off.
Okay, Saeed, last word to you.
Yeah, look, I think that the Trump administration is going to be an interesting one to watch, especially when it comes to imports and exports and the protection of the economy. I think that when it comes to our government specifically, that Canada First approach is going to be the most pragmatic going forward.
All right, well, guess what? We're probably going to be talking about this every Wednesday for the next 4 years, so I'll leave it there. Thanks, guys, our wonderful front bench, Saeed Selvam, Jamie Ellerton, Karl Belanger, and Hannah Thibedeau. We'll take a quick break. Today's takeaway is next.